Recorded in sinfully sunny Las Vegas, Nevada. Avantpop Bookstore presents Interviews. Joining us on this episode of Avantpop Bookstore Presents is Staci Layne Wilson. Staci is a writer, director, producer, and host of Rock and Roll Nightmares podcast. Some of her series that she has written are the Rock and Roll Nightmares series and the Immortal Confession series. Her latest film is The Second Age of Aquarius, a sci-fi comedy. Joining us now, Staci Layne Wilson. Journalist, director, producer, writer. She's worked behind the scenes. She has now done she's an author of multiple books, and also the daughter of two legendary Hollywood people. And I thought we'd roll back before we get into all your entertainment that you've done.
Okay.
And talk a little bit about your legendary parents. I mean, your dad was a founding member of the Ventures.
That's right, yes. Mostly known for their surf music like Hawaii Five-0, and they had hits with Wipeout and Pipeline, and their first big hit was Walk Don't Run. And they are, one of the premier guitar groups of the 60s. They came about with the rise of the electric guitar, so it was just kind of the perfect alchemy. My dad is Don Wilson, a founding member and the rhythm guitarist, and my mom is actually the cover model for Walk Don't Run Volume 2. And
Funny,
so it's pretty cool to have both of my parents on an iconic album cover.
Yeah, and it seems somehow you missed that childhood wild side, or at least it's not documented.
Well, I did write my memoirs, but I guess they're fairly tame compared to some other Gen Xers who grew up in Hollywood. But
yeah. So it seems like you're kind of following in the lines of both your parents here. Your dad's music comes into almost everything you do.
Absolutely, yes.
And then your mother's thrive for writing and gossip. Like she loves telling those stories. So
yeah. My mom was one of the first. I believe she was the second female editor of Confidential magazine, which was very scandalous in the 50s and 60s. But she went on board, I believe, in 1971 or 72. So yes, I grew up with my mom writing all the time and reading books and scandalous magazines and things like that. And I was never shielded from anything as a kid. In fact, at the time we're talking right now, Kenneth Anger recently passed away, and he wrote Hollywood Babylon. And that was a book that I read when I was maybe 10, and so I grew up with all of that, and always had a fascination for the dark side of almost everything.
Yeah. Well, that your movies, how many have you done now? I mean, there's so many. You've produced, written, directed. I mean, almost 20, close to 20
Right.
now?
Some of those are shorts, but yes, I have a few feature films under my belt, and also the documentary about the Ventures, Stars on Guitars.
Yeah. And then you've also worked behind the scenes, basically a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I worked for many, many years as an entertainment reporter when I lived in Hollywood, and I worked for the Sci-Fi Channel and Yahoo Movies, and I was a freelancer, so I was all over the place. But one of the most lasting and rewarding jobs was with the Sci-Fi Channel, and worked with Patrick Lee as my sort of above me, and he gave me some really great assignments. So I got to travel the world and interview movie stars. I mean, there's really nothing to complain about there.
Now, you have a big fascination with horror as well.
Yes.
Which I love. One of your latest books is the Rhapsody in Red. And it's two Hollywood up-and-comers, or maybe they're already in the scene, and they have their vampire love, power couple love affair.
Yeah, that's kind of one of my paranormal series that I write for Third Street Press, and that was the latest book. There's 4 in all. And it's really fun to fictionalize and sort of amplify Hollywood in the 70s, and that's kind of when the books start, and then they go into the 2000s, and then they go back to the 20s, and so it's really fun because vampires can just bridge about any gap.
Yeah. What was what you did? A couple of series. You got the True.
Right, Rock and Roll Nightmares.
Yeah. And then is it not True Crime?
Well, it's Rock and Roll Nightmares. True Stories are the two nonfiction books, but there's also some fiction horror in the series as well, and there's at least 7 more books planned, so there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, let's see, you also have your podcast. You're doing a podcast.
Yeah, Rock and Roll Nightmares podcast.
And let's see, I wanted to talk a little bit about your book City of Devils. I was curious about that one. That one we don't carry. So
you
that
should.
Yeah, definitely. Tell us a little bit about the theme of that one.
Well, that is an anthology of short stories that I wrote all myself. Like the Rock and Roll Nightmares anthologies, I have other guest writers chiming in. So City of Devils is all Hollywood movie based, the archetypes. There's a story about a child actor, and then there's another story about the eternal roommate, who's the actor kind of bouncing around from place to place. That story is called Doom for Rent, and there's, they're dark comedy, very dark comedy, but there's the actress who will do anything to win the Academy Award, and so there's the Hollywood producer, kind of Harvey Weinstein-esque, who gets his comeuppance, and so it's just kind of a collection of stories that are tied together through the location of Hollywood, but each story has their own characters.
Now, which came first, the film side of your career or the writing side?
Writing, when I was a kid, of course, I looked up to my mom as being a writer and an editor, and she was very literary driven, shall we say. Like, I grew up with a bookcase to die for, with every kind of book you can imagine, and nothing was off limits to me. So I did a lot of reading, and I just wanted to emulate her and also the authors that I grew up loving. And I actually sold my first article when I was 12 to a national magazine about a pony that I had trained and raised. And the editor of the magazine actually really liked what I wrote and asked me if I could do like an editorial every once in a while about the progress of training my pony. So yeah, that's how I got the bug, because not only was it validation from an outside source, but it was also a paying job. And as a kid, when you're that young, and it's kind of cool.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, so it was very encouraging.
Yeah, well, was it seeing your mom train big cats that kind of influenced training your pony?
Maybe. I kind of went the opposite way. She was into predators and I was into their prey, I suppose. But yeah, the big cats left before I arrived, otherwise I may not be here.
Right.
She worked with Ralph Heffler, who was a very famous animal trainer in Hollywood, and Zamba the lion was one of his big cats that was in a lot of movies. And she also worked with Sir Tom, who was in a Disney movie called The Cat, and she had Jate the cheetah that she would walk around Hollywood Boulevard on a leopard leash, that matched his fur. So it was all just very, very heightened and fun. So I've only really seen pictures of them. So I didn't get to actually interact with those cats because my dad said, there's a little infant in the house. Maybe we shouldn't have wild animals here. Yeah. So that he put the kibosh on that. But I did grow up with all kinds of animals because my mom was a big time animal lover. Cats were her favorite. So I always had lots of cats. But she let me have ponies. I had like 4 or 5 ponies in the backyard and in the valley where we lived at the time. And rats. She actually brought home a drunken monkey from a bar once that was given to her from an alcoholic that kind of wandered through with his pet monkey. That monkey was vicious, though. I'm still I think I still have a bald spot here somewhere from where he pulled my hair out. So it was really a very interesting childhood to say the least.
Yeah. Now, with your dad in music, were you ever a musician yourself?
No, I don't have that aptitude. I love music. It really, of all the things, music, books, music, I think music moves me the most, and that would be the one thing that I could never give up in my life is listening to music. It's really just gotten me through a lot of hard times and a lot of great times. There's just something about music that really drives my soul. Yeah. But I have zero aptitude. I took one guitar lesson. I was like, wow, this is really hard. I don't think so. So I will just be an admirer.
Well, growing up in California, I feel the same way about music and everything else that I do. Music's always been the first. And growing up in California, your dad's band was always playing everywhere.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It was
as a
great.
kid, though, I didn't really appreciate it. Your parents are just kind of like, they're just my parents. They're nothing, to be proud of, because it's uncool, when your parents are kind of, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's a weird thing, because my mom did a lot of cheesecake modeling and nude modeling and things, and she'd break out her magazine sometimes at a party or something, and I'd be like, oh, Mom. But of course now I think it's really a great legacy to have, but it's funny when you're a kid, your parents are just uncool. So I used to listen to Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and the Rolling Stones, Judas Priest, and, I'd be wearing my T-shirts to my dad's concerts. He's like, why don't you wear a Ventures T-shirt to my concert,
Yeah, well, it's funny. One of my favorite pictures that I gave to my daughter was the one of Slayer, and he's going like this, and his daughter's next to him going, really, Dad?
Exactly.
My daughter thought that was literally our life. She's like, yep, that's it. And that's, I think, how most...
Yeah, for sure. But as an adult, I certainly look back with great gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of music, I know one of your favorite bands is the Butthole Surfers.
One of,
when did you start listening to the Butthole Surfers?
Well, in the 90s, I guess, is, when they were popular.
Did you ever get a chance to interview Gibby or any of the band?
I did not. Unfortunately, with my particular area of expertise when I was working as an entertainment reporter, I did interview quite a few musicians, but only if they were connected with a movie in some way. Yeah. So, I talked to Marilyn Manson. I did talk to Jimmy Page, who's actually my absolute all-time favorite for the documentary that he did at Might Get Loud, and Jack White, who I love. The one that got away, though, was David Bowie, because he was connected with a lot of movies when I was working with the Sci-Fi Channel. The Prestige was one, and he was in that movie. And they said, on the tip sheet, he's going to be on the press line at the red carpet, and he wasn't there. I was like, eh. Yeah. But I did get to interview Eminem.
Still great.
Not the same, but,
the same. Nice. Now, do you have any, I know you've got an upcoming movie you're working on, Don't Get in the Car, you co-wrote?
Yes, that one is making the rounds right now at film festivals, and it's kind of a gritty throwback to the 1970s grindhouse movies. Mm-hmm. Like something, a lower budget, let me preface this with that, but, kind of like Abel Ferrara kind of movies where it's like a woman who's being sort of relentlessly pursued by all these gritty underworld figures, and she gets revenge in the end. So it's a fun one.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's the best part about grindhouse movies. Now, one of your latest books was also Rock Tales, Recipes of Cocktails.
Yes, and thank you for hosting our very first signing.
We're sold out of that one, in fact.
That was so much fun.
Yeah. What was the inspiration for that? The love of rock and its lifestyle?
And booze. Actually, I'm not a very big drinker, which I say in the preface, which is kind of funny, or the introduction, because I really can't drink that much. I tend to get migraines from it, but I love a nice crafted cocktail. But really, it kind of came about as a whim. Before the holidays last year, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a cocktail book that I could kind of put in with my Rock and Roll Nightmares brand, put it into the mix for people that may not like to read long books, and it could be fun to invite some of my favorite musicians and people that I've interviewed on my podcast, or people that I know who are in the music world, to contribute a rock tale. And also do something nice for charity, because the Sweet Relief Musicians Fund is one of my favorites, and they do so much good. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to do something like that, fun for us and good for them, and it really just kind of took off from there. And I was going to do maybe a quick and dirty, like throw it together thing, but then it turned out to be more than that. So I really took a lot of time doing the photos and getting all the just everything right for the recipes. That was very important. And then some people took longer than others to get their recipes to me.
That happens.
So it didn't come out until this year. So it missed the holiday season, but it's kind of an evergreen content. So
Yeah, when we think they're going to be quick and easy, it's usually when they take the longest.
Exactly, yeah. And especially when, you're working with others and rely on other people's schedules, and they're kind enough to it's a donation, I don't pay them for their contributions, so.
Well, there was another series that you had that I was really interested in, The Immortal Confessions. Can you talk a little bit? I didn't realize that one until later on when I was,
okay, yeah. So that is
website.
the vampire books, the paranormal vampire books, and that came about through the publisher, Third Street Press, who I had met them at a Horror Writers Association meeting. The person that is actually the editor that kind of assigns stories, and I pitched it to her, and she said, "Oh, that sounds great. Can you write a whole series?" I was like, "Oh, okay." So I did, but fiction is a little more time consuming and a little bit more difficult for me, but I was able to have free reign and put all the things that I love into it. So there's a lot of me in the books, which is a love of history and the paranormal, and they're kind of cozy mysteries, but they're also horror light, and there's just a lot of context with them. So it's fun, and they're also funny. They have some corny humor in there, which I was able to interject with one of the characters.
Yeah, soft and enjoyable, I think, is the best way to describe your fiction.
Thank you.
It's fun, and it touches all those bases, but without getting too gruesome or dark, and still with the humor.
And there's audiobooks too, and I have the best narrators that just really bring the characters to life, which is another fun part of being an author, I think, is when you get to collaborate with others in ways like that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you have any upcoming books that you're working on or will be working on?
Yes, I am in the midst of putting together another fictional anthology in the Rock and Roll Nightmares series.
Nice.
And it's called 28, and it's speculative fiction on what if the members of the 27 Club would have lived.
Okay.
So I just got the Kurt Cobain story in from the authors today, and I'm itching to read it. I haven't read it yet, so I'm really excited about that. And I'm also working on one of the stories, Jim Morrison's story, about what if he had faked his death, because that was one of the the conspiracy theories. So I have him living in New Orleans as a sort of a filmmaker who does like claymation and makes really interesting dark films. But it's also got a little element of Fright Night. I don't know if you remember that movie where the kid thinks that his next door neighbor is a vampire, but I have it being the kid thinks her next door neighbor is Jim Morrison. So
nice.
So it's fun. And I have him also kind of, he was really starting to put on a lot of weight, so I have him almost like Marlon Brando-esque, wearing caftans around the house.
I did see it.
Yeah. So it's fun. I love speculative fiction, like just what if stories.
Yeah. My uncle was a barber in Santa Monica for years. He used to do a lot of Hollywood guys, and there was the karate Indian kung fu guy. I forget his name. I want to say Jack something, but
I don't know.
He was an underground guy, but in all of his movies I saw, he was just a badass. And then went to his house, and he was very Marlon Brando. Where my uncle cut his hair. He enjoyed the good Hollywood life and chilling. Now, how about directing? Are you got any other films? Are you going to do another long feature film?
I do have one that's in the works. It's something that I directed a few years back, and it is finally coming together. I'm working with the editor who did the animation and editing on my Ventures documentary, and she's super talented. So I'm giving her kind of free rein to just go crazy with the editing. But the concept is Panic Room meets Tourist Trap. So if you're familiar with those movies, it's called Night of the Mannequins, and it's about these possibly sentient mannequins kind of wreaking havoc with home invaders. So
nice.
Another dark comedy.
Where do you pull some of your inspiration from, other than the basics there? Do you got any? Do you have a love for any author that you try to emulate, or anyone in that area that inspires you?
I'm pretty voracious when it comes to consumption of books and films, so I can't really point to any one in particular nowadays. But I love reading all kinds of books, mostly anything dark, though, dark and comedic, because that's kind of my brand too. But I'm currently reading the latest novel by Carolyn Kepnes, You and Only You, one of the Joe Goldberg novels, and it's fantastic. It's really good. In fact, I'm listening to the audiobook, actually. And there's an argument now. Are you really reading when you're listening to an audiobook? What do you think?
Well, I fall asleep when I listen to audiobooks.
I'm driving, so I hope I don't fall asleep.
I figure any way you can consume. For me, reading, my imagination starts doing a little bit more activity than when I'm listening. And I'm so easily distracted. So if there's a fly in the room, then I'm not listening.
Well, yeah, it's just a different way of consuming a story, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
and I think either way, entertainment is entertainment. However
Yes.
you want to watch it, see it in a play, hear it in whatever. It's all juicy and good.
Right. And it all kind of informs us.
Yeah. Now let's talk about your podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, Rock and Roll Nightmares. You have some fantastic musicians that a lot of times people might not know about.
Yeah, I like to put the spotlight on musicians that either like I've met or I know, or someone who intrigues me. Sometimes I'll just reach out to someone that I don't know, but fortunately my circle of acquaintances is quite wide, so I can really pick and choose from a lot of cool people. Like for instance, Phil Soussan, the bassist for Ozzy Osbourne in the early 80s, right after Randy Rhoads passed away. It was really, that time in Ozzy's career where he was really having a lot of hits. And so Phil Soussan, he was there, and he also played bass for Billy Idol, and he almost worked for Jimmy Page, and he's in a band now called Last in Line that's fantastic, that plays Las Vegas all the time. So actually I love to go to Counts Vamped and see the bands there, and sometimes I'll just kind of find someone that intrigues me, like there's a band called Hail Mary, so I had the lead singer on my show, and I didn't know her at all. I just kind of found her on Facebook, but she had some amazing stories, and I just think everyone, regardless of where their station is in the hierarchy of anything, they'll have their own kind of twist on it, and I love to hear their stories.
Yeah, I'm a big B-side guy, especially with people, and you're probably the most famous person we've had on here. But I was like, the up and coming, the band that plays before, and the unheard of artist or writer that always intrigues me.
Yeah, but the podcast also has authors of music related books. And photographers, Lisa S. Johnson, who's also here in Las Vegas. She did some amazing guitar photography books, so she had some amazing stories. So anything that's kind of horror or music adjacent, where I can tie them all in together, I like to do that.
That's great. Yeah, you've got quite a few on there, and you can listen to them anywhere you listen
to
stream.
I'm on season 5 now.
Yeah, heck yeah. Now, it's your love of horror. What was the first horror movie you saw, and what was your age?
Well, as I mentioned, nothing was wasn't shielded from
I'm
anything.
asking.
So it's kind of a toss-up between two very different horror movies. I remember when I was staying with my dad, because my parents divorced when I was very young. I was about 2 at the time, so I would stay with my dad on occasion when he wasn't on tour. and he would let me stay up late to watch the midnight horror movie, and he loved them too. He loved the Universal monsters and the old school stuff. Yeah. So I saw The Pit and the Pendulum with Vincent Price.
Oh,
yeah. And that one
classic.
Like really hooked me, and I just remember like staying awake to watch that. And then years later, actually, I got to interview the director Roger Corman and got to know him a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really been so gratifying to be able to do that. And I feel so lucky. And then the other movie that my mom showed me was The Exorcist.
Oh, boy.
I was way too young for that. And then I remember she would I was not able to sleep that night.
I bet.
And she would peer in my door and say, Reagan. My mom was kind of sadistic. So, yeah.
Wow. And you still loved horror.
I do.
That.
Actually, The Exorcist is still one of my all-time favorite movies.
Oh, nice. Well, hey, other than the love of your rats, we can let you out of here. But I want to talk a little about, I know you've loved animals and you grew up with them, but now you have 3?
I have 3 rats, yes.
Yeah. What's their names?
They're precious. 2 of them are actually named after Brian De Palma horror movie characters played by Margot Kidder in the movie Sisters, Danielle and Dominique. And my boyfriend Aaron came up with that. So then they are sisters. And then the other one is Daisy, and she's a rescue from a reptile store. She could have been snake food, but instead she's enjoying the high life here in Las Vegas with her adopted sisters. Yeah, I have Ratter Day on Instagram that's rather popular.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to see Staci's rats, then you can go on Instagram.
Yeah, they have a lot of fans.
Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on, taking a little time to join us here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Heck yeah, it's such an honor. And I look forward to getting more of your books in store.
Absolutely. And don't forget, 28 is coming out.
Yeah.
Got to do a signing here.
I'd like to thank Staci Layne Wilson for joining us on this episode of Avantpop Bookstore Presents. You can find Staci's books in Las Vegas at Avantpop Bookstore or online at stacilaynewilson.com. The theme music for Avantpop Bookstore Presents is performed by artist Dillashoe. And I hope you can join us again for another edition of Avantpop Bookstore Presents.